Hello and welcome. I'm Court Booth, and I'm back with another segment of our series, By the People. This is a series where we bring into the CCTV studios folks in town who are doing meaningful things on our collective behalf to make Concord the wonderful place it is, and today the wonderful place it's going to be. We have three people with us today. On my far right, Elise Woodward. In the middle, Gary Kleiman. And immediately next to me, Marcia Rasmussen. Marcia, you are the Director of Planning and Land Management.
Correct, for the town.
Okay, and Gary and Elise, you are respectively the co-chairs of the Envision 2030.
Envision Concord,
Thank
bridge
you.
to
Okay.
2030, yes.
So they're here to correct me on all of this. And so I'll read from the notes here. Envision Concord, bridge to 2030. And this is referred to also as the new comprehensive long-range plan effort. And I say new because Concord has a history of trying to be proactive and careful in its planning. We're a suburban community with many a pressure that we have to cope with, many a challenge, and we want to do the very best we can to envision the future so that we work towards something that we in fact have carefully created up here so that it someday becomes reality for all of us. Now, that's easy for me to say at this lofty level, but what do we mean in a practical sense? What is it that Envision 2030, Envision Concord 2030 intends to do? And where did the charge come from? How did it come about? Gary or Marcia?
Well, let me start.
Yeah.
Concord, as you mentioned, has a long history of planning efforts. And back in the 1920s, when the state first adopted zoning, the town envisioned how we would zone our community for land use. In the 1950s, then again in the 1980s, and 2005 was our last comprehensive plan. This is not a plan that sits on the shelf. We implement various aspects of that plan, and it turned out that with the 2005 plan, there were over 300 action items that people wanted us to implement, and I would say about a third of them were actively completed within the time frame to 2015, and then another third were underway, and the final third were probably not as necessary, or there was redirection. During that time period, the Select Board adopted principles of sustainability, and so this plan that we are working on now is hoping to integrate those sustainability principles in our planning effort. As well, we've adopted more of a future look with the American Planning Association's sustainable principles. And so I think this initiative is going to try to integrate those principles into a planning effort that will also meet our master planning requirements at the state level. So we have a number of different aspects that we're trying to meet with this single plan that will allow us to direct our resources so that we are most efficient and effective in achieving those results, and be aware of what people's needs are, meeting people's needs for the future.
So I'm hearing there's more complexity than previous efforts, more efforts at alignment across various levels of public enterprise or government. And the dates you cite say that this planning effort has to recycle itself more frequently than it used to, meaning it's becoming more of a constant effort on our part. And then the other big feature is that sustainability is central to this time, a term we're familiar with now, but perhaps in 2005 that wasn't part of the vocabulary.
Well, sustainability, as well as some of the other features that are included in the American Planning Association's handbook. They have this handbook, Sustaining Places, Best Practices for Comprehensive Plans. And they actually have 6 principles that they look at, in addition to sustainability, things like interwoven equity, livability, livable built environment, and so forth. So and economic resiliency. So there's a number of different principles, but you're right, we need to be more efficient in the process of taking into account all of this complexity and developing a plan, maybe more frequently than every 5 years. So with that in mind, we've been working for the last several months since the select board appointed us. And when I say us, I'm a representative of the planning board, but they also, the Comprehensive Plan Committee includes representation from Council on Aging, the Historical Commission, the Recreation Commission, Public Works, School Committee, the Light Board, Concord Housing Development Corporation, and some at-large members as well. So we have broad representation from the community already built into the committee structure, but what we're really excited about is we've also retained Civic Moxie, a great consulting firm of planners that really are focused on getting public input. Because while you get certain perspectives from the official committees of the town, a lot of folks are busy. They're dealing with their kids, they're dealing with their jobs, they're not able to participate in the committee process, but it's essential that if we develop a plan that's going to work for all Concordians, we get their participation. Civic Moxie recognizes that, and so they've designed a process that, in addition to the data we've collected over the last several months, we'll be going through a more extensive data collection process before we turn to a second phase of analyzing all of that data and trying to come up with the implementation plan that will work for all of the issues that are embodied in the APA principles. And then eventually developing an implementation plan. And that's another aspect of their focus, is an action plan that really is actionable.
So Elise, speak to that for a bit. What I'm hearing Gary say is this is about citizen participation, civic activity, having a voice, and yet we're not experts in this. How does Civic Moxie come in and work on behalf of this committee, who then works on behalf of all of us in this sort of iterative process? Do you really want all our voices? We don't always know what we're talking about.
I think that the most exciting thing about the Comprehensive Long-Range Plan is this opportunity every decade or so for the community to really be vocal about what they think is wonderful about Concord, where they are worried, what they think needs attention going forward. So we know that this is a unique system that Concord is a unique system where we live. And there are so many unique characteristics about our town and community that are worthy of preserving, and yet there are so many opportunities for improving the environment that we have. So the Comprehensive Long-Range Plan is really designed to think about how those systems integrate, as Marcia said. And this Civic Moxie consultant will be working with the Comprehensive Long-Range Plan Committee and intentionally working with us to define the narrative and to develop an actionable item, an actionable plan. So whether it will be 100 actionable items or 300 as the 2005 Comprehensive Long-Range Plan had, we don't know yet, but that is the key to moving the community to the future that we envision today. So Civic Moxie will be raising their profile within the community in the next few months through intentional public outreach. One of the wonderful, exciting things about this consultant for the committee was that they have a very proactive stance toward collecting public input. And specifically, they're very interested in what teens and parents of teens think and have to say about the future, because in fact they will be the civic leaders of the future.
They'll be paying the taxes
Exactly.
and making the decisions on our behalf when this plan ultimately unfolds.
True. So my generation has a point of view, but it's very important to the success of this plan, we believe, to have the voices of the future generations who will move into leadership. And so our very first public opportunity for public input will be held next week, May 31st. It's Wednesday evening. It's going to be at the high school cafeteria. Again, a different venue designed to engage families and younger members of the community to come and just have casual conversations with their neighbors, meet new people, and give us a point of view about what they think is working in Concord, where they see issues, and we probably will ask if there's one thing you'd like to the comprehensive long-range plan to include, what is it?
Okay.
So just the beginning of prioritization of where we should be putting our efforts.
Is there anything off the table? Could this be public health? Could this be recreation? Could this be education? Could this be how we govern ourselves?
Yeah,
Is
we're
this,
not starting from a complete blank slate, in that, you know, we have been spending some time gathering data, and we've already identified a number of issues that people are concerned about. You know, transportation for seniors, transportation for young children, being able to have a bikeable community, a walkable community. So these transportation issues have already been identified. Housing, the cost of housing, housing for seniors, housing for young people. So, you know, economic vibrancy of our village centers, as you pointed out, open space and natural resources, protecting those areas and making them more accessible. All of those issues are on the table. And, you know, if people have their own issues that have not been recognized by either our committee work or other plans and you know, committee work that has been brought to our attention already, they're certainly welcome, and this is the kind of opportunity to bring that out.
I
So
see
everything's on the table.
everything's on the table.
Absolutely.
I see this as perhaps a look at opportunities and hopes for one person, and another person might come at this with the sense of we've got some very present threats or looming issues that we have to deal with. Are you going to invite both the here's what I want in a decade and 2 decades from now, and here's what frightens me now, I hope
Yes.
we address it?
Well, I think that is true of every plan that we've ever seen.
Okay, yeah.
Is that we identify what those threats might be and how we might address it as a community. And oftentimes there are conflicting viewpoints, and I think we need to have those conversations. That helps inform the decision making moving forward, so that we are more cautious about how we allocate our resources or our activities, or and it's really important, I think, to say that yes, there will be challenges, there will be conflicts, because even I've been working on the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail for almost 30 years, when it was first envisioned as a feasibility study, and even when we've had town meeting votes that say yes, we want to move forward, when we start construction, people are still not happy entirely. And so how do you hear those voices, make sure that they are heard? How can you address them? What can we change or adapt, or just say wait and see? You know, we've got 2 years of construction activity, but at the end, what will be the product at the end of this whole effort? Many of the things that were identified in 2005 that we started working on discovered that there were conflicting issues, or there were new opportunities, and taking advantage of those. So if you have a planning framework and you have identified where there might be conflicts, you can say, okay, here's an opportunity to address those conflicts, or a way of mitigating the impact to a particular group of people.
Just to build on that,
Yeah,
I mean,
please.
it was actually, I think Elise would agree, it was one of the fun aspects of some of our data gathering work. We did strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, threat exercise, you know, this SWOT analysis
Sure.
that the consulting firms tend to look at. And it was often challenging for the group to, when an issue would come up, we would say, well, is that an opportunity or a threat? You know, it could be seen as both.
How do we frame it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think the key is just to be proactive in addressing the issue. And you don't necessarily have to label it as an opportunity or a threat, but think about what is the way that the community would embrace in a consensus manner of moving forward so that you
And then-
avoid the threat and take advantage of the opportunity.
And then once it gets on that list, if you will, let's call it a list, and it might be 300 in number, there is some inexact but very real process by which these get prioritized. Some get realized, some get partially realized, some drop off the table. Some might resolve themselves without town intervention or town resources. Could you speak a little bit more to that process, though? Where do these, let's call them needs, that surface in Envision Concord, where do they ultimately go? How do they filter out for action?
Well, they go immediately to the select board
Okay.
because that is the board that charged this committee. So I think that the comprehensive long-range plan as a deliverable would go to the select board. But fundamentally, every board and committee in town has certain sets of responsibilities. So this will be this plan will be widely disseminated. So the planning board will take up issues that or action items within the plan that are pertinent to the planning board. The select board and town manager would take up other items that were pertinent to their work. That would be true for the historic committees, really for the financial committees, really every aspect of the comprehensive long-range plan would be taken up collectively. And of course, those action items will have to be prioritized because as a community, we do not have unlimited revenue and unlimited funds for this. But I think that the benefit of the long-range plan is to show a framework toward which we're working that will allow us to prioritize the use of our resources to achieve that future.
Okay. Now, let's go back to the 30-year effort, the 30-year war for the Freeman Rail Trail, which is bearing fruit very quickly now after all of this work. And now let me put on the cynic hat and say, you know, we're just four talking heads talking about another plan. And the reason I say that is because if things that we do to better ourselves could take many, many years, it might then become hard to see. It's hard to follow the breadcrumbs from genesis to realization. So were there a cynic watching us today who were to challenge us, so what does this all mean? What would any of you cite as an example for how one of our prior efforts to do comprehensive planning has in fact generated activity that we can point to with some pride?
Well, I'm going to start because in the 1950s, the concern at that point in time was an increasing population. And the concern was that we were going to sprawl. So there was an effort made to identify land acquisition as a priority for the community. And the Concord Land Conservation Trust was formed, and the town adopted a land acquisition policy so that we began actively pursuing land acquisition for open space purposes. And at the same time, zoning initiatives were amended. That's when the town adopted the 80,000 or 2-acre zoning areas. We were looking carefully at how development might happen. A decision was made that a third of the town would be served by town sewer, the remainder would be on-site septic systems, and we've used that as a guiding principle, if you will. The town has preserved through state, federal, local, and private entities about a third of the land, or 33% of the land, is permanently protected. So that was a 1950s initiative, but we continue that effort today. And in terms of our housing goals, in the 1980s, there was a desire to have more affordable housing. We had the Concord Housing Authority that was doing some good work, but they wanted to have private entities develop affordable housing. And since that time, we have achieved our 10% mandate from the state. It's 10.4%. So trying to maintain that and retain that is really important. But that was a stated goal and an initiative, and so efforts continue, and because it is a priority for the community.
And I would throw out another example is the West Concord Master Plan. I mean, it's taken, 10 years, 12 years from the inception of this concept of, we ought to be more deliberate and thoughtful about how development in the village of West Concord is taking place, to see all the way through to a planning process, implementation or development of a West Concord master plan, and now we're starting to see incremental steps towards implementation of that plan. And West Concord, we just had a West Concord open house that the West Concord Advisory Committee hosted last week. And it was really amazing to see all of the progress, all of the projects that are on the table that are coming together now. And West Concord really is being developed in a manner consistent with that broader vision. That's taken some time to come together, but it is.
The inference here is development is going to happen regardless. So can we shape it?
Well, we want to be thoughtful about it, I think, because if we're not thoughtful about it, it may occur in ways that would jeopardize some of the unique characteristics that are important to citizens of Concord. I think also now that we have the sustainability principles that were enacted by the Select Board in 2011, and the recent town meeting vote approving Article 51 that sets energy goals for the future, that those sustainability notions and the energy goals will increasingly be used as a filter for choices that we make for our future together. And so I think that integration in all aspects of the plan will be an important strength for the town going forward.
Let's turn to our two co-chairs and tell us a little bit about your path to this role now. You've both been active in town affairs. How did you get here? What steps along the path of participation in town government can you speak to?
Yeah.
You probably have a longer path.
Go
I have,
ahead, Liz,
I have a long and winding path. Since the early 90s, when my children were in the public schools in Concord, I have volunteered in the schools. I've served on the finance committee. I served on the zoning board, and then was a member of the select board for 6 years. Mm-hmm. And in my last year on the select board, which was 2014, 2015, I was very vocal with the town manager that I thought it was time to fund the next iteration of the comprehensive long-range plan. And so when that funding did appear in the town budget, then it seemed that I should volunteer to sit on this committee since I had
nicely,
really,
didn't you? Yeah, okay.
So, and also I did serve on the Energy Future Task Force in the past year. And so the energy goals of the future are front and center for me. But the Comprehensive Long Range Plan is a unique opportunity. It's not a standing committee. It exists for a period of time. And yet I think collectively, especially if we get robust public input, that we will collectively develop a wonderful plan that will take us down a path that we want to be on, not just any path.
Got it. Thank you. Gary.
My role is somewhat more direct in that I started out as the example I discussed earlier on the West Concord Advisory Committee. It was a West Concord task force at that point. But living in West Concord, I was very interested in development activity going on in the village, and really enjoyed being a part of the West Concord Task Force. When the task force released its recommendations, much like Elise, it only made sense when one of the recommendations was to form a West Concord Advisory Committee, a standing committee, with an active focus on the village of West Concord. I felt like since I had a hand in making that recommendation, I should step up and volunteer to serve on that advisory committee. So I was the inaugural chair of the West Concord Advisory Committee. And after 2 terms on the West Concord Advisory Committee, I heard, which is a subcommittee to the Planning Board, and a slot opened up on the Planning Board, I thought it would be a great way to continue service to the community to serve in the Planning Board. Now, that was right around the same time that this new committee was charged by the Select Board to develop a long-range plan. And on the Planning Board, my background is environmental policy. So I've been interested in these sustainability issues and thinking a lot about how our zoning bylaw, how it addresses energy and energy efficiency, and it really seemed like the appropriate place to address that was not necessarily on the Planning Board as much as longer-term recommendations that the comprehensive plan could undertake. So it really fit naturally with my role on the Planning Board to serve as the Planning Board representative to
Well,
the
Even though this is the early days of this effort, I want to thank both of you for stepping up and encouraging the rest of us to step up. Marcia, as a department head, what's the interface? We have two volunteers who are stepping forward to chair the group. You are the professional at the helm of the Department of Planning and Land Management. What's the relationship, the interface, the connection between you and this group?
Well, my office provides the staff support,
Okay.
or is the liaison to the committee. And then we were responsible for the hiring of the consultant. So we prepared the request for proposals, and then a group of us, committee members and town staff, interviewed the three proposers or respondents
Sure.
to our RFP and made the selection for Civic Moxie. So we're sort of the interface between the consultant and the committee, and then trying to focus the energies so that we're not moving in opposite directions necessarily, but so that there's good communication between the consultant and the committee. And then providing support for events such as the kickoff event that's happening next Wednesday, but also we have intention to have presence at different community-wide events. So the 4th of July Picnic in the Park celebration, sometimes at football games. I think the Concord Ag Day in September. All of these are events that we will be targeting to have a presence and continue that outreach and input from the community.
So our job then as citizens in the town is staying attuned to what you're doing, staying informed, watching the Journal, watching CCTV, noticing the signs at the events, and
Right.
talking to you folks.
And there's also a website that we have set up,
Okay.
and that's envisionconcord.org. So we're hoping that people will visit there. They'll have an opportunity to make comments, to identify areas of concern or areas where they particularly love and want to protect on that website. So.
You can also see all of the committee materials and meeting notes and that sort of thing on that website. So we encourage people to register at envisionconcord.org and pay attention. Keep a lookout for the signs around town. We are, as Marcia says, we plan to take this opportunity for public input to existing townwide events so that people don't feel they have to make a special trip to come see us.
Perfect.
But we'd love it. We have public meetings every other Friday morning, 8 a.m., bright and early.
And we'd know this if we went to Envision Concord.
Well, and while the website is just kicking off, envisionconcord.org, you will be seeing more information on there about the process, which includes not only the tabled events that Marcia has spoken about at community events, but also they'll be doing surveys later towards the fall. They'll be doing interviews, additional focus group events. So there's a broad variety of ways that we'll be seeking public participation that will be, you'll be hearing more about.
Good.
If it's not on the website immediately. But yeah, the idea is to get as broad a perspective from the public as possible.
And I think we'll wind up on that note as we finish up. The broad perspective you're looking for, the many voices that may not be a harmonious chorus, but you're going to try to organize those voices and make sense out of what we're telling you and asking you and suggesting through this process. Let's end with that kickoff event, the first of many, as Marcia says, Wednesday, May 31, 7 p.m. at the high school. The registration at envisionconcord.org
Org.
Is that for the event, or is that just to stay in
No,
touch
that's
with
to
you?
stay in touch
That's to
with
stay in
them.
touch with you, and we don't need a registration necessarily
Just
to
show
come
up.
next Wednesday. You mentioned younger voices.
Yes.
If mom or dad is there, is the 5-year-old welcome? The 10-year-old welcome? What do you mean by family? No, seriously.
The 10-year-old is definitely welcome. We do not have childcare.
Got it.
So-
Good to know. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay.
And if you are a teen who's interested, or a parent who has a teenager who believes would like to be involved, they may contact Jennifer Clark at Concord Carlisle Youth Services. Her email is jclark with an E at concordma.gov, and she has more information. So we're
Got it.
very interested in having teenagers attend that kickoff event.
Very good. All right. Well, it's been our pleasure to have Marcia and Gary and Elise with us today. Envision Concord 2030 is underway now, and it will be underway for some time. There will be many an opportunity for you and for me to have our voices heard. I think what we're hearing from Elise and Gary and Marcia is they need our voices. They need a broad set of opinions, and it's going to ultimately constitute the data that you work with to help us articulate what we want in the future, and what we want in the future is indeed going to largely shape what we get in the future. So with that, thank you very much, and thank you for taking us on.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
Appreciate it.